Hello. Okay, today we're going to read chapter 13 and 14. Thursday you read chapter 11 and 12, and you learned about Gylfi's discovery, that there are some like little tunnels leading off of the canyons that she's discovered. And so that aids in their plan or helps their plan because they thought maybe we can march in place and the other owls can march around us. And so in chapter 12, Moon Scalding, they do that, but they are caught. And they have a plan to just don't say anything. The owls take Gylfi and Soren to two separate chambers to kind of question them. And they try to moonblink them again there, right? So that they forget their words. And that's when there's a click inside Soren's head. The moment he thought of the word Ga'Hoole, something seemed to clear in his brain. So they kind of felt like they were being pulled under or being moonblinked, right? To forget their words. And so then Soren says, Gylfi, have you ever heard of the legends of Ga'Hoole? And so he starts calling them he starts telling a legend. And as soon as he does, then their minds are more alert, right? And so they can't be pulled under. So the chapter 12 ended with Soren's voice was hushed and lovely as he told the tale of the first legend of Ga'Hoole, the coming of Hoole. The two little owls' hearts grew strong, their brains cleared, and their gizzards once again quickened. So he was able to save them from their punishment for not walking. Chapter 13, Perfection. I think it's working, the screech owl Sporn said to the Obla General Skench. From their stone perches high above the moon-blazed cell, Skench and Sporn looked down on Soren and Gylfi. They could not hear the hushed tale that Soren was repeating, and the two young owls were careful to stand very still. When the moon finally slipped down in the night sky, Skench and Sporn alighted onto the floor of the moon-blazed cell and peered into each of the owls' eyes. Perfect, Sporn declared. We are perfect, Gylfi replied. We are so pleased to be perfect for our masters. Number 25-2 feels quite perfect and complete. Soren picked up the cue. Number 12-1 also feels perfect. We await your commands. Come along, little ones. I knew you could do it, Sporn said. This was the most kindly tone either Soren or Gylfi had ever heard Sporn use. Next thing you know, you'll be having your specialness ceremony. Rack drops, thought Gylfi. You know, Sporn, Skench was saying, these two were marked as haggards from the start, or at least the barn owl was, and sometimes I think that a haggard once scalded actually makes a better servant to our cause. Dream on, you addle-brained bird, the words roared silently in Soren's head. I am thinking of the little one for Battleclaw maintenance and the barn owl for the agorium, or maybe even the hatchery for the little one. Hatchery? Agorium? Battleclaws? Soren and Gylfi were suddenly very alert, yet they managed to walk in the dazed manner of the perfectly moonblinked. You know, Skench continued, I think we need to put them in the same stone pit and the same Glacidium, reinforced moon scalding. If they look into each other's eyes, I think it has been proven that it reinforces the effects of the scalding. Ha! Gylfi nearly laughed out loud. So the two young owls were returned to Soren's Glacidium, and Jat and Jut were duly informed that these two were to be together and periodically made to gaze into each other's eyes. All right, you two, barked Jut. Face off. And neither Jat nor Jut could see the twinkle deep within each of the owls' eyes, nor did they hear Soren say, as they turned their backs, We did it, Gylfi. We did it. So once more the days slipped into the nights, and the nights became dark links in the silver chain of the moon as it cycled through its dwankings and full shines, sometimes appearing as an immense, throbbing, bright globe, at other times as thin as the finest thread of down filament from an owl's breast. Patiently they waited for their flight feathers to grow in. Each day, Soren would do a quick inventory of what he had, which showed promise. His flight feathers were definitely advancing, perhaps not fully fledged, but definitely out there. When he flipped his head back, as owls could do, and rotated it, he could get a good view of his tail feathers, and when no one was looking, he would practice rotating and ruddering maneuvers. There would, of course, be no first flight ceremonies. In fact, Soren lived in perpetual dread of being informed in a most unceremonious way that he was not destined for flight as, apparently, the spotted owl, 12-8, formally Hortense had been. This, she always said, was due to her top-secret status that had something to do with being a broody. Think of all we've learned, Soren, Gylfi said one day, after having served in the Battle-Claw's chamber. She seemed blithely confident that when the time came for them to fly, they would, and that it was much more important to survey the entire range of canyons and gulches that compose St. Aggies, so that when they were ready, they could escape, never be caught again, and warn others. Let me tell you what I've learned today in the Battle-Claw's chamber. Soren indulged Gylfi and let her run on. Well, she began, they have the Battle-Claws that fit over their talons, but they don't make them themselves. They can sort of repair them, but basically they have to scavenge them from other places, other battlefields. But what other battlefields? Look, Gylfi, I didn't live long in Tyto, but I never saw or heard my parents talk about any battles. Did you ever hear your parents talk of any? Gylfi thought hard. No, I didn't, she said slowly. And when we were snatched, they weren't wearing them. They would hardly need them for us. We were nestlings. Our own talons were not even hardened off. Gylfi blinked at Soren as if he had just said something astonishing. She remained silent for a moment. That's just it, isn't it, Soren? They didn't need them for us. No, but they needed us and these Battle-Claws for something bigger, much bigger. Remember in the third legend of the Gahulian cycle, when the sea serpents that could walk upon the land and swim in the sea started to form their plan? Remember how they wanted to drag the entire world of owls and birds into the sea so that they could reign on both land and sea? Yes, Soren said quietly. I think they are planning something big like that. Soren started to say that the story of the serpents was just a legend and not true. Remember, a legend is a story that's passed down from generation to generation, or from, like, if you hear your grandparents tell your parents a story and then your parents tell you that story, and not necessarily true. They can't find, like, if you were to look up the history of the story, you wouldn't necessarily find it as a factual story, right? It's more of a story that's passed down. So Soren's like, I don't want to tell him that it's a legend and it's not true. That such sea creatures did not exist. But then he realized deep within himself it didn't really matter. These owls did exist, and maybe they wanted just what the imaginary creatures of the legends wanted. Soren had a horrible vision of the entire forest kingdom of Tyto and the desert kingdom of Kunir and all the owl kingdoms being swirled into the stone world of St. Aggies. So, Gylfi continued, when we do escape, Soren, we must know as much as we can. We must know about Flex and why they are more precious than gold, and what they plan to do to the kingdoms of owls. It is going to be our duty to warn the rest of the owl kingdoms. Don't worry about flying now. Think about how much we are learning. Look, we know the Pelatorium inside out. We've been on cricket detail. Now Battle-Claws. The last area we have to crack, pardon the pun, is the Egorium and that broody place. So what's funny about that, a pun is like a figure of speech or a phrase that, so they're they're talking about the last place that they have to go is the Egorium. Egg is the beginning, Orium. And so he says the last area we have to crack, and you crack eggs. So that's a pun. Pardon the pun. It's a play on words, right? So he's saying the last area we have to crack, pardon the pun, is the Egorium and that broody place. Top secret, remember? As if 12-8 would ever let us forget. Oh, Glocks, here she comes now. Hang on, Soren. I'm going to try some of my charm. Gylfi winked, and then the dull light of a moon-blinked owl stole into her eyes. Soren watched as Gylfi, in the semblance of the perfectly moon-blinked owl, trotted up to Hortense. 12-8, you appear calm and satisfied from the perfection of performing your duty well. I cannot imagine that your specialness ceremony is far off. I do not need a ceremony to feel special. For you see, 25-2, I am entrusted with the most sacred and vital of tasks for our beloved St. Aggie's community. Yes, that must be so. 12-1 and I would feel it An honor to serve in such a manner. But then again, we do not have the qualifications, the obvious talents of you, 12-8. Ah, to be the vessel of such trust. 12-8 seemed to swell with pride before their eyes. A pit monitor suddenly swooped down. Humbleness, correction, humility check, dear. It was a smallish, whiskered screech owl. Her amber eyes blinked a warning out of her bristly face. 12-8 seemed to shrink to half her size instantly. Oh, I beg your pardon. It is pride in my work, not pride in myself. I remain a humble servant to a great cause. Yes, a great cause, Gylfi repeated the words, and although it was a statement, Soren really heard a question at the center. What was this great cause? Yes, that's better, dear. The whiskered screech owl nodded and floated off to a higher perch in the stone pit. Gylfi felt that the moment was right. You are the last owl in the world that I would ever say lacked humility, 12-8. You are, for my friend and myself, a perfect example of humility. You are beyond humbleness. You are... Gylfi was madly searching for a word. What's she going to say next? Soren couldn't imagine. He had never seen such a demonstration of outrageous fawning. You are subglacious. 12-8 blinked at the word, as did Soren, who had no idea what subglacious meant. We, my friend, and I, only wish that we could serve in the Egorium and thus attain such humbleness as yourself. So see how they're kind of trying to work their way into it? That's the next place they have to check out, right? Your words are kind, 25-2. I shall hope that they might encourage me in my continuing quest for humility while in service to a great cause. She wandered off, looking a tad more moon-blinked than before, if that was possible. What in Glox's name is subglacious? Soren said as soon as she was out of earshot. No idea. I made it up. We've got to get into that Egorium and the hatchery, Gylfi replied, and the twinkle returned to her eyes. Chapter 14, the Egorium. Hold on, I'm going to turn my light on. I'm having trouble seeing. It's getting a little darker. Hold on. Okay, much better. I have trouble seeing in the dark. Okay, chapter 14, the Egorium. The following day, Soren was back at his post in the Pelletorium. Indeed, he had been promoted to a second-degree picker and was now appalled to find himself reciting the exact same words to a new owlet that 47-2 had said to him upon arriving. I am 12-1. I am to be your guide for the Pelletorium. Follow me. He spoke in the same peculiar manner. The hollow, clipped sounds came naturally to him now, so when Gylfi came up with a tray of fresh pellets, he was perhaps more than ready to listen to her suggestions of a possible new work site. The Egorium, I think I found us an entry-level position. Egg sorting. Fellow in the pellet storage area told me about it. Might blight in the hatchery. So what does that mean? Soren asked. I'm not sure. All I know is that they had to take owls off duty in the Egorium and put them in the hatchery. I still don't really understand what they do in either one of those places. Not to mention, what are these flecks that the first-degree pickers pick? It's like a puzzle that never seems to quite come together. It's as if we have all these pieces of things, but are we any closer to knowing what this place is about and how to get out of it? Or if we'll ever learn to fly? Soren was getting more and more agitated as he spoke. Try to keep calm, Soren. I just have a feeling that we're close to something. Soren and Gylfi stood in a small antechamber. Above them perched a large, snowy owl. Welcome to the Egorium, the snowy hooted deeply. To work in the Egorium and the hatchery is the highest of honors. You have been given temporary, top-secret clearance. We are in a bit of a bind these days as we have had an epidemic of mite blight. For this reason, you shall not be given a DNF, or destined not to fly, ranking, but you shall have to undergo a procedure at the end of your term, which, although not painful, shall make you forget the information that you shall be exposed to here. Moon scalding, Gylfi whispered, but we know how to handle that. Right. Soren was still weak with relief over not being a DNF. So thankfully, they won't be labeled as a DNF, destined not to fly, meaning they won't be able to fly. But instead, after everything they learn in the Egorium and hatchery, they're going to moon scald them so that they forget everything that they learned. But Gylfi's saying, like, that's okay. We've got this. We know what to do. We know our plan to help us keep the information right and not forget everything. And now into the Agorium. Please follow me, the Snowy hooted softly. There was a collective gasp from all the owls, for even a perfectly moon-blinked owl could not help but be stunned by the scene before them. Thousands upon thousands of eggs were being sorted, eggs of all sizes and all pure white, glistening now in the moonlight, and as they sorted, they sang a song. By these eggs we set a store, we sort them out and ask for more. Pygmy, elf, spotted and snowy, make our gizzards get all glowy. Barn owls, great grays, bard and screech, give our hearts an extra beat. The work's top secret, that is true, but we are the best, the Agorium crew. Don't give a hoot that no one flies, for upon these eggs the future relies. Such is our noble destiny, to guard St. Aggie's through eternity. And look how it's written like a poem, but they sang it. And remember how we were saying that songs are really just poems that are sung, right? So that's what they were doing. I don't know the tune, but that's the song that they're all singing. The instructions were simple. For this first phase, each of them was to look for eggs of their own species, as these would be the easiest for them to identify. So the barn owls are going to identify or look for the eggs that are barn owl eggs. They'll identify their own type, right? Thus, Soren was to sort out barn owl eggs, and Gylfi was to sort out elf owl eggs. They were to roll the eggs into a designated area. From there, they would be transported by larger and more experienced owls to the hatchery. I think you can probably make a prediction about what happens at the hatchery, right? If at the Agorium, they're sorting all the eggs, and then they move them to the hatchery. I hear the word hatch. Soren was simply aghast. This was exactly what he had overheard his mother and father talking about. Egg snatching. Unspeakable. That was the word his mother had used. Unspeakable. But here it was, right before his eyes. He began to tremble. There was a sickening feeling in his gizzard. So remember how they were talking about at the beginning of the beginning of the book, these owls were coming and snatching or taking eggs out of their nests, right? I think we know where they went. Don't go yeep on me, Gylfi hissed. How can I go yeep? I don't even know how to fly yet. Going yeep, as every owl and bird knew, was a term for when one's wings seemed to lock, when a bird lost its instincts and could no longer fly, and when suddenly plummet to the ground. As loathsome as the work was, it was pretty easy. However, Soren could not help but wonder with each barn owl egg he found where it had come from in Tydo. Did his parents know this owl egg's parents? Luckily, the barn owl egg station and the elf owl station were not that far apart. So as Soren and Gylfi arrived at their respective stations, rolling their eggs, they would exchange a word or two. I haven't seen 12-8 or Tense, Soren said. She's not here. She's in the hatchery. That's where the broodies are. They sit on the eggs. We've got to get in there. How do you plan to do that? Soren asked. I don't know. I'll think of something, Gylfi said. Just before their shift ended, Gylfi thought of something. You! Me what? Soren asked. You're a perfect broody. Me? What? Me a broody? Have you gone yoiks? I'm a male owl. Male owls don't sit nests. They do occasionally, in very cold climates sometimes. Oh, what do you know about penguins? Penguins are the ones that keep the eggs warm, right? Or the males keep the eggs warm. They do occasionally, in very cold climates sometimes. Well, this isn't an especially cold climate. Why not you? They don't need an elf owl now, but they do need a barn owl. I heard them talking and, by the way, they have plenty of male owls up there sitting on nests. What do you mean by up there? Up where? Up there, Soren. I think it's higher than the library. I think it's very close to the sky. I think... Gylfi paused for dramatic effect. We could fly from up there. Soren felt his gizzard give a lurch. I'll go. Good fella, Gylfi gave Soren a friendly cuff, although she was so short she could hardly reach his wing. But it seemed like a really male owl thing to do, and she wanted to assure Soren that, although he was going to be a broody, he was still one tough little owl. And I myself plan on getting promoted to moss tender. Okay, so they have to get to the hatchery. And The next chapter, chapter 15, the hatchery. So we will find out what they discover in the hatchery.